Hello and welcome everyone to the National Veteran Small Business Coalition's Charlie Mike series. And this is a special series that's part of our Bite Size series, and we're thrilled to have back Chris White from Clark Hill. And Chris, it looks like our Bite Size training today is going to be on, oh my gosh, I received a stop work order. Now what do I do? So I'm going to kind of turn this over to you. And I'm going to go ahead and go into stealth mode, and then the question fairy will pop back from time to time if there's questions. So I'll see you in a bit.
Sounds great. Thank you, Marie. And welcome, everyone. As Marie mentioned, I'm Chris White. I'm an attorney, and I'm glad to be here to try to shed a little insight as to what a stop work order is, what that means, your rights, and your next steps. My contact information is in the bottom left, but there will be more contact information at the end as well, should you have any questions. So again, I'm Chris White. I'm an associate in the government contracts and regulatory practice for Clark Hill. I also work in our lobbying group as well as our economics group. Today we're talking about stop work orders, which is under FAR 52.242-15, which says the contracting officer may, at any time, by written order to the contractor, require the contractor to stop all or any part of the work called for by this contract for a period of 90 days after the order is delivered to the contractor, and for any further period to which the parties may agree. We'll get into what each of those parts means here shortly, but most importantly from that, it must be in writing, the period of 90 days, and it requires both parties to agree in order for a stop work order to be extended. So today we'll talk about what is a stop work order. Now that you've received one, what should you do? And it's now the 91st day, what now? I say questions are encouraged throughout the presentation. That means today that role will be played by Marie, but should you have any questions following the presentation, don't hesitate to shoot me an email or give me a call, and I'm happy to field those questions at that point too. So what is a stop work order? It's a written order from the contracting officer requiring a contractor to stop all or part of the work for 90 days. What that means is your contract should have the FAR clause for stop work order included in it, because that is the authority under which this may occur. Should the government, for whatever purpose, decide it needs to pause performance and stop all work, it'll issue the stop work order. They may do it by phone, they may do it by email, but ultimately it needs to be in writing to you. And that should be done via some basis like a contract modification. If the parties, namely you and the government, decide that you're willing to extend the stop work order beyond 90 days, you should agree to that mutually and also in writing, and you should get a written modification to the original stop work order. This happens because there are certain circumstances where the government is trying to decide if it has the right funding, if the need still exists, if the need's changing, if there's something involved with the contract. So they want to pause it with time to make that evaluation. And they want to pause it rather than cancel the contract to decide if there's a way to continue using this contract vehicle. Oftentimes, though, the stop work order is just a preface to a termination for convenience or termination for default, but it gives the government some time to make that decision, as well as excuses the contractor from any performance during that time. It's generally not done due to performance issues, but that can be the case. But generally it's done, as I said, based on an evolving need or not evolving requirement, evolving funding. And so it's important to contact the contracting officer and to find out what's going on. But when you do receive one of these written stop work orders, you must immediately comply with the terms. So that's why it's important to read this document and make sure you're complying with the terms and take reasonable steps to minimize the incurrence of any costs that are applicable to the work covered by the order. After the stop work order is canceled, and unless the contract is terminated, or after the 90 days expire, you must resume work. The FAR actually says the contractor shall resume work. So you've received one. What do you do now? You read the stop work order, and upon receiving that written stop work order, you must immediately cease work and take those reasonable steps to minimize costs. What we're talking about there is you're stopping workers from working, so you're not billing for the labor. You're stopping suppliers from delivering any supplies you may be ordering from them. You're stopping subcontractors. You're stopping fabricators. You're stopping anything that's related to the contract or the portion of the contract that's been placed under stop work order, and having everyone pause until they're given the go-ahead to resume. But you should also carefully review the stop work order to make sure you're confirming which part of the contract is being stopped, or is it the entire contract? And so it should be very detailed in there to let you know just what the government is stopping. You should reach out to the contracting officer, get any clarification. You'll want to know the basis for the stop work order. That means, is the government looking for funding? Is the government not sure they still have the need? Is the government not sure that based on some change, it's going to cost too much and they no longer have the funding to continue with it? Is there a misunderstanding that the government believes that maybe something's exceeding the scope and maybe you can't do everything they now want to have done? Or does the government mistakenly believe that there are going to need to be these significant changes to the project, and those changes are going to make the pricing too much and they can't afford it? Sometimes, if you get ahead of it, and we've had this recently with a client of mine, the government issued there's actually a suspension of work rather than a stop of work, but the government indicated they wanted to terminate for convenience because they believed that the costs were going to increase so much that they couldn't continue with the contract, and so they're going to end the contract, and they were evaluating it through consistent and careful communication with the contracting officer. We ultimately scheduled a call, and the client was able to assure the government that they could still do the work, get it done on time, and that they didn't believe the changes were going to make it so the pricing would take it outside of the realm of the contract vehicle. So the government, rescinded the suspension and decided to move forward and keep the contract alive, and also to modify the contract to change based on what needed to be changed. And so they're able to save a contract. So it's worth the communication to make sure you understand where the government's coming from, and you can clarify or correct any maybe misunderstandings by the government to try to keep that contract alive. As mentioned, you do need to immediately notify your subcontractors and providers in writing to provide them guidance what they need to do. Ideally, if your prime contract includes the clause for stop work order, you'd flow that down into your subcontract. That way you can try to minimize any claims of breach of contract or any other money damages a subcontractor or supplier might relate to it. It doesn't mean they won't exist, as there's a chance that there are unanticipated costs, whether that's due to a fabrication process that can't be paused, whether that's due to certain materials having to be ordered in large bulk, whether that means that there's employees that either need to be let go and you can't guarantee you get them back, or employees that can't be allocated somewhere else, and so they need to continue to be paid. Those are all important. Most importantly, though, document. Many successful contractors in this realm, once they receive a stop work order, create a new accounting code, and they compartmentalize all costs during a stop work order period to a separate accounting column, so that when the time comes to demonstrate your costs, present the documentation to back up that cost, it's all isolated for just the stop work order period, and it's not something that has to be somehow carved out and explained from the overall cost of the contract. This will even be more helpful should you go into a termination for convenience and you need to prepare a settlement proposal. You can isolate what is going to be included as part of either an REA due to the stop work order, or a request for equitable adjustment, part of the termination for convenience, or part of a settlement based on stop work order. But having that clear documentation that can be readily identified and supported is very important to make sure you get paid. So now we're on to the 91st day. What now?
Oh, Chris, can you go?
Yeah, Marie. Oh, there you are.
Oh, here I am. Can you go back a slide? Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of great information here. So I have a couple questions. So I'm in construction and I'm on the site and I'm getting ready to go ahead and put in, a piling, or I'm getting ready to put in, a huge structural, a structural item. And then supervisor walks on scene and says, we have a stop work order. Do I continue, since I have the material, it's there, I have the team and I'm ready to install it? Do I go ahead and install it, or does everything at the construction site just stop? And that kind of falls into line with your other bullet, to go ahead and reach out to the contracting officer. Should the program project manager with, the business owner be reaching out to the CO to say, hey, today we're installing X, Y, and Z. Are we authorized to do that? How does that all kind of play out?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So like many legal questions, the answer is it depends. But I mean, the challenge here, and this is where things that should be simple become complicated. By the letter of the FAR, the stop work order should detail, we've provided it to you on this day, Friday, June 20th, and we gave it to you at 12 p.m. Eastern. Okay, so that means any work prior to that, absolutely allowable. You were supposed to be working. But once you get that, unless the stop work order says it's effective sometime in the future, by the frankest definition, you would stop at 12 p.m. Eastern because they handed it to you at 12 p.m. Eastern. However, yes, you should contact the contracting officer, and when someone receives that and they know what's going on that day, it's worth reaching out by phone or by email, and you do need to stop people. And if a giant piling is hanging from a crane, not ideal, but it may need to hang from that crane a little bit longer. So you can reach out to the contracting officer and say, we're literally swinging a piling right now. Do you want us to put it back on the ground, or do you want us to install it? And then with that, that's where it's worth saying, like laying this piling down is a highly, precise material. Laying it down may cause warping, may cause, pitting, may cause whatever. So there's a chance for damage and increased cost by laying it back down and leaving it there for some unknown period of time. Or we need to find somewhere to store this piling. So we need to get a truck. We need to haul it out. We need to find a warehouse. We need to find a storage site. That has costs. These are all things you want to let the CO know. However, if the stop work order says you shall stop all work at 12 noon on June 20th, and you proceed to do that and you incur costs after that, you should still document that. Document it with the decision basis and support as to why you chose to do that, because the government, when they receive that cost from you, and especially if there's a stop work order that turns into a termination, and now you're billing them for work after the stop work order, you've taken some risk because you did work after a stop work order, and they will push back on why you did that work. And it's likely, especially if this stop work order transitions into a termination, the government will say, you worked, we told you not to. Like, yeah. We had decided to cut ties, and we decided to stop paying. So we're not going to pay you for work you voluntarily did contrary to the stop work order. So, yeah, I mean, the CO may see the prudence of installing the piling or completing that one last little thing that's like in the throes of nearing completion. They may not, and the government can be fickle. Where sometimes that decision is made, and I don't mean that in a pejorative to the government, but it just sometimes when that decision's made, and like if all funding has been pulled and they said the funding is just gone, then the contracting officer literally can't pay you to have done something else, and so they even though it makes sense, there's more going on behind the scenes than you may be aware of.
Okay, and then another scenario is I'm a part supplier. And I've gone ahead and let's say it's Thursday, it's June 19th, and I've gone ahead and I've pulled together my lot of what I'm going to send to, send to the government. And then and so boom, it's in the mail, it's going across the airspace, or it's going across via truck to my federal agency. And then I get the stop work order, let's say by the end of the day on the 19th. And it says, this is notification that we want you to stop work effective, let's say 5 p.m. June 19th. Now I've shipped that out via FedEx at 2 p.m. So that's still a billable cost that I can charge the government. Okay, it's just ties to your document bullet there that you really need to then have proof of the FedEx, when it was picked up, when it was shipped out, and then just let the CO know, hey, today we went ahead and we shipped out these parts to this federal agency for this particular program. And okay, I think just want to.
Yeah, I mean, I know I was just nodding, but yes, that is correct. And so that's part of the document. Now, if the contract says, you shall ship on the 20th and you hurriedly ship it out on the 19th, still document it. They may have a question about that because they're like, oh, well, if you'd waited to ship it pursuant to the contract, this wouldn't have occurred. That being said, unless the contract says, you shall not ship prior to the 20th, then you still have some room in there. And so maybe it's because that's, your routine process. And that's where part of the documentation is we always ship on this date, or, it's being that, it's Friday and we know that time is of the essence of receiving these parts on time. We always, ship one day prior to make sure it's shipped on a Thursday rather than a Friday before the weekend to ensure, anything like that you can include in there as to like your basis for why you're doing it and this and that. That's all very helpful to give the government the idea. Conversely, though, if the stop work order comes in and says on the 19th, it says you shall stop work as of 0800 Eastern on Friday, June 20th, I wouldn't hustle to FedEx and ship off a ton of materials at 5 p.m. on, June 19th, because would you technically be permitted to do so? Probably yes. However, if you've been notified that stop work order is coming on the 8th, 8 a.m. the next day.
Yeah.
They might push back. I mean, they don't usually do that. They don't usually say stop work starting tomorrow. And if they do, they would say, stop work effective 0800. Please don't order based on this understanding. Or that's where you get that. And if you're supposed to ship on the 19th and they stop work the next day, that's where you send a note being like, hey, I'm supposed to ship stuff out today. See, the stop work order starts tomorrow. What am I doing? Am I shipping this stuff or not shipping this stuff? But even if you can't ship it, if you're a supplier, if you're a manufacturer who's presenting stuff as part of a contract and you've incurred costs to get ready to the point of shipment, and shipment is just simply putting in the box and sending it, but all your costs are incurred prior to shipping. If the stop work order comes in and just stops you from putting in the mail, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not entitled to reimbursement for those costs because you've taken all the effort to get into that spot. They maybe ask you to do duty to mitigation. Is there another client you can send it to? Instead of going to the government, can you do it commercial? Can you sell them? Sometimes it's, if you're doing metal fabrication, can you sell it for scrap? There's a lot of different options of what they may ask you to do to try to mitigate it. But that's, again, documentation of, I can only sell it for scrap. And before you do that, it generally requires the government to direct you to sell it for scrap, rather than the government may just take possession anyway if they recognize that it's something they're going to be paying for regardless. Or if it's a specialty product for the government, sometimes they instruct you to destroy it. And they'll pay you for it, and then they tell you, it's ours, destroy it, so it doesn't go to somebody else. Okay. So you'll see some of that stuff, but that tends to shift into the termination portion, which there's another Charlie and Mike up there about the termination for convenience. They'll talk about that a bit more. But yeah, if you ship something, or if you're doing something prior to, document it. Explain the timing, explain the purpose, and have it ready to go. If you're a sub, if you're a supplier, if you're material, you'll be getting contacted by the prime. So then you'll push it back to the prime and let them know what your costs have been so far.
So I think one of the key and critical things to take away at this point is communication is paramount. You really have to communicate with the CO and make sure that you're understanding what the requirements are.
Absolutely. And making sure the CO understands what costs there will be. And, to help them make an informed decision, because sometimes you may have had a transition in CO. The CO may not understand what goes on at the subcontractor or supplier material side. And so communicating up to them, like, we can do this, but here are the costs that are going to happen, may affect the CO's decision. They could modify it. They could do something different with it, but it's better not to surprise them with it at the end of the day.
Okay, cool. I'll go in stealth mode again. Ciao.
Sure. Yeah, so now it's the 91st day. What do you do? So, pursuant to the language of the FAR, upon cancellation of the stop work order or the expiration of the 90 days, unless mutually extended, you must resume work. It says the contractor shall resume work. You should also be ready to prepare a request for equitable adjustment for any costs associated with the stop work order. So that means that, and this REA you'll see in several of the bullet points, but if you incurred costs while you were sitting around waiting for the stop work order to expire or termination, you'll want to include that as a request for equitable adjustment. That can be, and this factors into the fact that the government, if you resume work, should issue an REA to account for increased time or increased costs based on that pause. If you're swinging that piling that Marie brought up, and because you had to put it down for 90 days, the piling's bent and no longer would meet the inspection criteria. So now you need to have a new piling, fabricated, manufactured, what have you, have it hauled to you, hire another crane, put it in again. Your costs are going to go up. So you need an REA to account for the fact that you're starting over because of this stop work order. REA is request for equitable adjustment. Likewise, if because of that you have to extend out by 120 days because that's how long it takes to get the new piling fabricated, then they need to extend the contract by the amount of time that was caused by the stop work order. And so you want to be prepared to do that. You have 30 days. Let me say it again. You have 30 days from the expiration of the stop work order or the cancellation of the stop work order to submit your request for equitable adjustment. Don't miss that. Make sure that's where this documentation during the stop work order comes into play. Document, document, document. As soon as you're done, you either know how to do it yourself or you have an attorney that knows how to draft a request for equitable adjustment. You get them all the documents, they put it on a letter, you sign it, you fire it off to the contracting officer, and you're good. But make sure you don't miss those 30 days. The government may also elect to terminate the work that was covered by the stop work order. That means they can do it either by default or termination for convenience. Termination for convenience, much like a stop work order, the government can terminate any of its contracts at any time just because it wants to, for virtually any reason. And default's obviously for a breach of contract. So the majority of the time you see these stop work orders lead to a termination for convenience. However, if there is some performance issue that's really driving why the stop work order happened, then you might see a default come out of that. As I said, the contract officer shall make an equitable adjustment as a delivery schedule and or contract price. This should come in as a contract modification. Make sure that whether it's from the original stop work or whether it's for the cancellation of the stop work order or whether it's for a termination for convenience, if they call you and tell you, you need that in writing. It needs to be in writing because that's the only way that a contract can actually be modified is in writing. So make sure you see that in writing. If you get T for seed, prepare and submit a settlement proposal. What that means is, much like this request for equitable adjustment we're talking about, if you're terminated for convenience, you're entitled to a settlement proposal where you present all the costs, all the past due money that will be incurred based on an early termination of all or part of a contract. And if it's terminated for default, you can prepare a request for equitable adjustment for costs resulting from the stop work order. And that's very similar to the one you would do that we talked about in the first bullet point. But again, this is all based on good documentation, recognizing the costs, recognizing you took efforts to mitigate, presenting the efforts you took to mitigate, and presenting the costs that are left over after those duty to mitigate, whether they're yours, whether they're your subcontractors, your suppliers, your manufacturers. All of that needs to be encompassed in there and presented to the government because they do know that work stop and work suspension does come at a cost. And so that'll be your next step. You'll either resume work with the REA or you'll go through a termination process. Marie.
Hey, Chris, in the early part of the presentation, you mentioned that some businesses will actually have kind of like a certain accounting code or whatever in their system for when this occurs. Do they also have like a special I'll say a special database, or they have like a partition on their server or whatever to go ahead and also upload documents as that reflect the impacted work? Or can you just at a very high level, maybe that's a whole nother Charlie Mike kind of thing? Uh,
Yeah, I can do it at a high level. I think, you know, I don't get necessarily always into the weeds about how people do their accounting. Maybe that they work with obviously a good CPA or whatever. But what I would say from somebody who drafts a lot of REAs, settlement proposals, negotiates a lot of these from the legal sense, what I think would make the most sense is, yes, in your accounting software, in your accounting book, you somehow flag it. And I don't run a lot of accounting softwares and accounting books. I usually get Excel outputs to me, but flag it in there and make sure it is allocated to a stop work period. And so whether that's putting that in a comment box, if you're someone who does your cost and accounting and regular old to sell, make a column. It's the comment box at the end and just write stop work period. And that way it's just clearly aligned there. If you have something a little bit more advanced or maybe automated or a program, I'm sure there are ways for you to flag it or otherwise label it and make sure it just says that it's a stop work related cost. And then on top of that, yes, I would 100%, whether you're old school and you have old accordion folders or file folders you keep in a drawer, or whether you're, Google Drive, or whether you're iManage, or whether you're what have you of a digital system, or if you're just Outlook and you have little Outlook folders, make a folder that says stop work order and start uploading email correspondence. If you've had emails from subcontractor suppliers, manufacturers, put those emails in that folder. If you have phone calls with them, fire an email or back to whoever you had the phone call with saying, hey, just to capture what we just talked about, we were talking about the stop work order and you've let us know that you're going to have the following costs because, this is what it's going to cost to stop and delay and to start back up. So these are the costs you're telling us we'll have. You've told us the following workers just can't be stood down or can't be reassigned. You've told us that the following materials or supplies will go bad and you have to repurchase them, or the piling will bend, or the crane either has to sit on site or we won't have it for another 9 months. So, these are all things because cranes are in high demand. Yeah. If you have to let go of that crane, maybe you don't know when you get the next crane. They tell you it's a 9-month wait, or you're paying to keep a crane sitting on site for 90 days. And those both are costs, whether it's time costs or whether it's money costs. Yeah. Put that in a folder. Make sure it's captured in writing, not just a hand note. Fire an email back to whoever you talk to, or have whoever talked to them fire an email to your CEO, CFO, whomever, saying, hey, just talk to such and such over at, Acme Cranes Inc. They said X, Y, and Z. So now we need to make sure that's understanding, and fire that email off to the contracting officer saying, just so you know, here's what we're hearing from our crane people. We're documenting this, but we want to make sure you're aware up front that, these are times and costs. If it gets too extreme, that may trigger a T for C. Tough to say, but it's better to have them do that early rather than surprise them later and then find out that they're like, now we're going to T for C you, or we're not going to pay for that because we didn't approve that crane sitting around for 90 days. Put those all in a file folder, whether physical or electronic, but something so you just have everything in one place. And that way, when it's time for it, you can just fire it all off. When I talk to a client about it, and I usually create a share file, and I say, upload everything into that share file that's relevant. If you just take a folder of yours and click and drag it into a share file and it's just right there for me, that's going to make it a lot easier. And that means that you pay me less in attorney's fees from having to filter through and try to find documents and let you know what other documents I need. So it's cost effective.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. Sounds like that could be something for a business owner to think about when they are structuring systems at the get-go. So, all right.
Absolutely.
Stealth mode. See you in a bit.
Well, that was actually my last bullet point. So I was going to turn to any real questions, but this final slide here, I put it up here as just kind of a general overview of my practice, areas of law that we advise people on, things that some clients are surprised to learn that either exist or there are people who specialize in it. So it's just a general food for thought type of capability sheet on my behalf. It has my contact information in the bottom right. On the opening slide was my cell phone. On this slide is my landline. So up to people on which one they'd rather use, but both will reach me. As I mentioned at the outset, any other questions you may have, please don't hesitate to email me. Don't hesitate to call me. I'm happy to do this. Beyond that, for NVSBC members, I do offer a deal where if they let me know, they get 2 hours of free advice. We do structure the engagement where that ends up being billed effectively as either non-billed, if it's a big project, or billed as client development, but you do get 2 free hours. So if you're wondering, why do I need a GovCon specialist, or can they even help me with this? That's a good way to find out. Put your foot in the water without any cost attached to it. But overall, a big thank you to NVSBC and to our sponsors, because I love giving these trainings, and I'm sure you'll get to hear my voice a few more times going forward.
You can count on that, Chris. So for everyone, we are going to have a few more little snippets here from Chris in the near future. So stay tuned for some additional bite-sized legal Charlie Mikes. So coming on up. And with that, I am going to call this one a wrap, everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.